Hey everyone, Cleo here, and today we are talking about the series progress that I've made throughout the last year. So starting September 2021 up until the end of August 2022. So I'm gonna divide these books in different categories. So first off, I'm gonna talk about this book series that I started within the last year. Then I'm gonna talk about specifically the ones that I started that only have one book so far. So the ones that I started and I'm immediately caught up with. Then I'm gonna talk about the books that I caught up with in the remainder of the past year. So either I'd already started it before, or there are multiple books within the series that I've already read at this point and I'm at the point where there's no further content for me to consume at this point. Series that I progressed in throughout the last year, so it already made some progress, but I'm not completely caught up yet. Series that I've completed, and then series that I've abandoned or that I treat as a standalone, basically. So, without further ado, this is gonna be a long video, so let's just get started. So first up, series that I started in the past year. So this is in no particular order, potentially it's chronological, but I'm not entirely sure if that's true. So, The Blade itself, so the first Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. Let me just make some more room. So first up we have The Blade itself, so the first Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. I started the first book within this series, I did not continue past that one yet, so it is definitely one that I am really eager to continue with. It was one of my priority fantasy reads, I think, in the video that I made in like December 2021, and I haven't gotten around to finishing it, but I am hoping to do so. The only problem with this one is that I have this particular edition that you cannot find anymore, so I would have to switch editions, which kind of pains me because I love this edition. It's just so nice and floppy, but hey, first world problems, right? So The Blade itself is often referred to as a grimdark fantasy series. It's a series in which we are following, I think, 3 characters, and to be fair, the first book is very much more character focused, so you're very much being introduced to these different characters, and there's not a whole ton of like overarching plots. Towards the end of the book, we do see our characters at the same place at the same time, kind of interacting, which for the majority of this book is not the case. So the ending of the first book is kind of pushing to the rest of the series, and so I'm eager to continue. I did have a good time with it, but I didn't have like the amazing time that I was expecting to, because, you know, a lot of people absolutely laud and adore this series, and so I was expecting to be blown away, and that wasn't the case. However, I am not giving up on this. I did definitely, as I say, have a good enough time with it. It's just that I was expecting more, but so hopefully going into the second book with less expectations will mean that I have a better time with it. Next up we have one that I don't physically own, and that is the Wayward Children series by Shauna McGuire. So I read the first book within this series, Every Heart a Doorway. So this is a YA portal fantasy series in which we're looking at kids who have returned from a portal world and now have to kind of deal with the aftermath. So they've come back from a world that was perfectly suited to them, and they are back in our world where they have to face difficulties of adapting, difficulties of people not necessarily accepting them for who they are. I did not necessarily love the first one. It was okay for me, but it also had a sort of like mystery detective type subplots, and I don't like that. So perhaps this was like the least okay entry point into the series for me. So I definitely will still try Down Amongst the Sticks and probably will do that throughout January when Be Sure-a-thon is hosted, which is a readathon all about the Wayward Children series. Next up we have the Lycanius trilogy by James Islington. So I read the first book in January, and I cannot believe it's already been so long, because for months now I've been saying that I need to continue, and I am currently reading the second book within this trilogy, but I cannot believe it's been since January that I picked this one up. But so this one is a trilogy in which we're looking at a world in which magic is basically bound by these rules because of a past event going horribly wrong. And so we have these 3 students at a magical academy basically, and they are about to take the test to decide whether they become magicians or whether they become shadows. And yeah, I'm not going to say too much about the plot of this one because it is way bigger than what I just explained. I really enjoyed this one. It's somewhat complex, so you do kind of need to keep your attention to it, but on the other hand, I also didn't really struggle with that neither, you know. And all in all, I just really enjoyed this one. A whole lot of world building, felt a lot more like sort of like classical fantasy, but then it also surprised me with the directions it was taking, and so I've been really eager to continue on, and so I'm currently reading the second book within this trilogy. Next up we have the Supernatural Investigation series by B.B. Alston. So I read the first book, Amari and the Night Brothers, and I believe the second book came out in August, and so that's the reason why I am not caught up, because at this point in time the second book came out and I didn't read this. So this is a middle grade series. It's basically kind of described as middle grade men in black. So our protagonist Amari was really close with her brother, and one day her brother kind of disappears and she has difficulties letting go, and then one day she receives a sort of like mysterious note from him saying that he has managed to score her an invitation for a job interview at the Bureau of Supernatural Affairs. So really enjoyed this one a lot, but you know, it's middle grade and that's really just not my things in particular, so it's probably something that I will continue for a readathon, for example, in which I just want like a quick and easy read to put in there between like thick fantasy adult books. Next up we have the Memoirs of Lady Trent series. So I only read the first book, A Natural History of Dragons. I think there are 5 books within this series. It is also already a completed series. We are looking at basically a woman who is defying her role within society. She kind of lives in Victoria era more or less, and so there's not really a place for women in, you know, academia, for example, or in many other fields, and Lady Trent kind of crosses those boundaries in her research into dragons. So first one I definitely enjoyed. It wasn't the sort of like 5-star experience I was hoping for, but once again it also had a little bit of a sort of like mystery sort of like subplots that's definitely towards the ending made me like lose interest a little bit. But yeah, I definitely enjoyed this one more than enough to want to continue. And then we have the Southern Reach trilogy by Jeff Vandermeer. So this is a horror trilogy, horror sci-fi, unsure what to name it. It's cosmic horror specifically. So in this one there's an area of our world that has become sort of like infected more or less. It's called Area X, I believe, and for decades or so they've been sending scientists into this area, but either they never return or the ones that return are never the same. And so we follow the new expedition going into this area, and they meet with a whole lot of crazy unexplainable stuff. So it's cosmic horror, meaning that you're never really gonna get an explanation for what's happening, but I love that sort of eerie, dark atmosphere that is created as a result. I'm eager to dive into the continuations for these. These are more sort of like companions, but they do have crossover appeal, I believe. So I'm eager to see the second one, because the second one's perspective sounds very interesting. But yeah, I just need to find the time for it. Next up we have The Serpent Gates by A.K. Larkwitz. So for the Howling Pack I read The Unspoken Name, first book within this duology, and maybe next year we will read the second one within this duology when the paperback for that one comes out. So this is orc fantasy, in which we're looking at this orc girl who has been kind of raised as a chosen one, so to speak. So she has been raised knowing that I don't know, when she's 12, I don't know the actual age anymore, she will be sacrificed at the altar for her god. However, the moment in which she has to go into this temple to perform the sacrifice, the priest offers her a way out and she takes it. I quite enjoyed this one. There were some problems I had with it, but it definitely was interesting enough to want to kind of continue and want to see more of this world, because it definitely was a very different world from any other fantasy that I've read, and at this point in time, I must admit that I don't remember too much about this one. So sadly it's not one that sticks very well in my mind, but yeah, I do definitely want to continue on. It is also sapphic and I just want more queer fantasy to read. Then we have a few that I started for which there was only one book out at that point in time. First up is The Ex-Hex by Aaron Sterling. So this is a sort of like fantasy romance, so to speak. It's like fantasy contemporary. We look at this girl who is a witch and she returns to her hometown after like a very long absence. The last time that she was there, she had just broken up with her boyfriend and she had kind of accidentally cursed him. And so going back to her hometown kind of activates the curse, and we see the impact on the town. It's a sort of like, it's a second chance romance. I love second chance romance. I thought it was fun and engaging, and you know, the sequel has just come out, but it came out after my cutoff time for this series update. So I'm not counting it in the first category, I'm counting it in this category. Secondly, we have The Book of Night by Holly Black. So this is Holly Black's adult debut. This is a noir type of fantasy. We're looking at this girl who has kind of been a swindler, a con person all of her life, and she's now trying to walk the straight and narrow. However, this is a world in which shadow magic has come to the surface, and she will, through circumstances, get involved into a bigger plot. It didn't really land, and if you've been seeing a lot of videos on BookTube of people who've read it, you'll know that it landed for almost nobody, and I don't know whether I want to continue. I kinda think it ended where it needed to end, and I don't actually want to continue. On the other hand, I'm pretty sure that the sequel will probably dive into shadow magic a lot more than the first one did, so that could be interesting, but I'm not entirely sure. This will be one that I'm kind of gonna hesitate about and potentially wait for reviews to come in before I decide whether I want to continue or not. Next, we have what can count as my biggest disappointment of the year, and also probably one of the biggest books on my shelf, because it is a beast, and that is The Tales of Tremaine by R.R. Virdi. First book called The First Binding. So I had an advanced reader copy for this, so I only read an uncorrected proof, but in principle I think more or less it's corresponded to the final product, hopefully with just a little bit more less grammatical errors or spelling errors. But yeah, this one was a huge disappointment. I was expecting so much out of it. It was like my highest anticipated release of the year. I'd really gotten hyped for this one. And so it is a epic fantasy set along the Silk Road in Asia. And in this one we're looking at a traveling bard who turns out to be more than he pretends to be. And so we have a story taking place on multiple layers, and the sort of like traveling bard layer is the one that didn't really interest me at all, but the story within a story, the story of him growing up, of his childhood, definitely interested me a whole lot more. However, the writing style for this one really didn't work all that well for me. It's very much more of an elaborate writing style, which I just cannot handle very well. I basically consider that to be too crafted, unnecessary, and often hiding problems with the content. And so in case you are a big fan of Name of the Wind, then know that this could actually work to your detriment when reading the first binding, because it is very much reminiscent of the Name of the Wind, extremely reminiscent of Name of the Wind. So I am still not decided about whether I want to continue with the series or not. I kind of want to give the second book a go, kind of to see whether, for example, it will do more with the magic system, because that might satisfy me more. But on the other hand, you know, I just don't want to be disappointed again. But yeah, can I be even more disappointed than I was this time around? Probably not. So we'll see. We'll see when the news for the second book arrives, whether I am excited to try it out or not. And then the final book that I started, that only has one book at this point in time, is The Final Strife by Sarah L. Arifi. So this is epic fantasy. It is set in a fictional world in which the color of your blood kind of determines your class. And so in this world there was a huge sort of like, I want to say rebellion, but it's probably not the right word. But there was a sort of like scheme put in place in which they stole a whole ton of red-blooded babies and replaced them with blue-blooded babies in order to train the red-blooded babies to fight against the system and to destroy the system from the inside. However, the scheme was discovered, and we're looking at one of the sole survivors of this rebellion kind of trying to find purpose in life again. This is as well a sapphic book. It has disability representation as well. Obviously it's also going to talk about classicism. I really enjoyed this one a whole lot, and I'm really super excited about the sequel that is coming out next year. Next up we get to the series for which I caught up. So first series that I caught up to, which I won't be caught up to for long, but I will probably read the next book this year still, is the Mistborn Era 2, so The Alloy of of Law and the remainder of the books. So this is a continuation series to Mistborn Era 1 to some extent, but it takes place over like 2 centuries or so after the original Mistborn series took place. The acts and the characters that we met in Mistborn Era 1 are basically the stuff of legends at this point in time. And Mistborn Era 2 takes place in a lot more industrialized world, and it is very much more a sort of like murder, mystery, detective type storyline. And if you've been paying attention throughout this video, I do not like that at all. And so Mistborn Era 2 also has not really been my series. I'm reading it because, you know, I want to continue with Mistborn. He is going to make a Mistborn Era 3, Mistborn Era 4. So I expect that to be important for me to have read Mistborn Era 2. But in all honesty, yeah, they just don't do much for me, you know. It's not like I hate reading them neither, but it's just an okay meh sort of time. The Bands of Mourning, the third book within the series so far, has been my favorite, the one that felt a little bit more like epic fantasy, but yeah, I haven't been on a great streak with Brandon Sanderson at the moment. Secondly, we have the Gentleman Bastard series. So first book, The Lies of Loch Lamora. Currently 3 books out, waiting for the 4th book, apparently for quite a while already. And I will say that I've been on a downward spiral with this series. So The Lies of Loch Lamora, we are following Loch Lamora, who is a sort of like natural born thief, so to speak, and so he's a natural born survivor who will go to any length in order to make his way through the world. And so he's part of a thieving gang, and we follow their shenanigans and also these sort of like problems that they get into and the way that they weasel their way out of it. I enjoyed the first one a whole lot, but afterwards I kind of like I enjoyed the sequels less and less, and so I'm actually not really excited about the 4th one, so potentially I will consider this an abandoned series, but I haven't made up my mind about that yet. So for now it is just in the caught up series. If it ever lands in the behind, if I ever get behind, I will decide then. And our final series within this category is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. And as I've been saying, I've been on a bad streak with Brandon Sanderson, and yeah, the Skyward series is no exception. So in this year, I will have probably read Cytonic and the 3 novellas that are part of this series, and yeah, all of those were bad times. I mean, some of the novellas were okay, but the novellas were just okay. None of them were like, oh wow, yeah, this really needed to be told, or that I'm happy that we're told. The novellas at best were kind of like, okay, yeah, I had an okay time with this, it was fun, but yeah, okay, that's about it. Cytonic I had a really bad time with. I really did not enjoy Cytonic, and so I don't know what to expect from the final book, Defiance. I am hoping that it will go back to kind of what I enjoyed about the first book, Skyward, because the first book was a 5-star for me. But I am not holding my breath for it neither. So in Skyward we're looking at Spensa, who's this young girl who lost her father when she was really young. Her father was part of the sort of like military, and he was a fighter pilot who lost his life in a big battle. However, he did not go down as a hero because he last minute abandoned mission, and so is treated as a traitor, and she is treated badly by association. However, her biggest wish in life is to become a fighter pilot like her father, but because of her association to him, the military doesn't really want her in that role neither. So time to talk about the series that I am making some progress in, and sadly that weren't too many. I only did that for Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the reboot comic edition. So I read the first one within Becca's 48-hour bookoplathon, not this 48-hour bookoplathon, the previous 48-hour bookoplathon. And I mainly made some progress very recently during the Magical Readathon, so in August. So this follows the iconic Buffy the Vampire Slayer TV show. This is a modernization. It starts off being pretty similar to the TV show, but some of the representation that is in the TV show later on gets thrown into the comic book from the beginning, and some characters that we don't meet in the first season, for example, are there from the beginning. But like from the second book of Buffy the Vampire Slayer already, there are some big changes as well taking place that I haven't decided yet whether I like them or not. But so yeah, I made some progress in this, but I'm definitely nowhere near completing this reboot comic book series. Finally, time to talk about some series that I actually completed within the last year, and sadly they aren't that many, so I've mainly been starting series, I've not really been completing, and out of the ones that I've completed there is also one that I started and completed at the same time, so I have not been reducing the amount of series that I've been reading, but so first the one that I started and completed this year, and that would be the Green Bone Saga by Fonda Lee, not by Jade Fonda, by Fonda Lee. So this is urban fantasy in which we're looking at the fictional island of Keikon, which is very well known for its jade trade. So jade that is harvested on this island can be used by jade warriors to kind of become superheroes, more or less. They have enhanced powers, they have enhanced physical prowess, they have enhanced mental prowess, and so this is an innate ability to the people born on Keikon. However, that also doesn't make them immune to the addictive nature of jade neither. And so the series as a whole looks at a conflict between two clans who have a big stake within the jade trade. And so it's a very strategic, political, economic fantasy. And I enjoyed my time with this one, but it's also one that I kind of was disappointed with because I expected to love it. So many people absolutely love it, so many people were super invested with this one, and I never really got invested emotionally in this series. So I do think that I had a good time with this one, and I did definitely appreciate a lot of things about it, but that emotional link, that emotional sort of investment, that sort of feeling of that never happened for me with this series, and that's really unfortunate because I really was hoping to have this one be a new favorite. Next series that I finished within the month of August, and so that is the Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. So this is one that has been waiting on my shelves for a while because I read the first book like over 2 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, and then I started Project Zero TBR, and because I didn't have book 2 and 3 on my shelves, I kind of left it there. And so now, once completing Project Zero TBR, this series was kind of my sort of like priority to finish. And so the Poppy War trilogy is a trilogy that looks at Chinese history and kind of retells it, revamps it in order to tell a fantastical tale of this young girl called Rin, who was orphaned during the Poppy Wars and whose biggest ambition is to get out of the circumstances she's currently in. She is living with her aunt and uncle, and she's basically just treated as the help there. They're basically expecting to sell her off to a local merchants in order for better circumstances for their store. But Rin is determined to escape this fate by studying for the state exams and hopefully landing a spot in the military academy of Sinagard. This is very much a war-centered strategy-based series. It will not shy away from giving you brutal portrayals of war, and do know that the events within this trilogy are also events that took place in real life. Of course, not the fantastical aspect to it, but the brutalities of war, the instances that are given of attacks that were made by one front to the other front. These are really heavily inspired by real life historical events. I had a good time with the Poppy War. It is not my favorite series of all time, but I definitely did enjoy it. I really enjoyed seeing the parallels with Chinese history. I did have a big problem with our protagonist, the problem being that, you know, she is morally grey, she's described it, but I would say that she's hinging on morally dark, but okay. And while, yeah, I think that is very well done, it also made it difficult to continue reading because I was not rooting for her. I was definitely rooting for her to have an early demise or something like that because I had expectations about where the series was going to end up. Yeah, another one that I enjoyed, but I never had that big emotional connection to it. I didn't have those shock moments that I saw other readers have with it, and so that kind of left me a little bit disappointed when it came to this, but there was enough about the series for me to enjoy as well. And then the final one that I finished is the Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyon. So I was caught up with this one, but the final book came out in May, so I completed it in the meantime. So this is a complex, convoluted, epic fantasy series that you really need to pay attention to, and that actually, even if you pay attention to, I feel like on the first go through, there might be a lot of things that you're kind of hazy about. And if you can accept confusion, if you can accept being like, oh, what are the family dynamics again, then this can be a really fun ride. And I definitely think that even when it kind of feels like you're not fully grasping it the first time around, if you continue on throughout the series, things will definitely start to fall more into play. And if you then actually also reread it, then definitely things will become a whole lot clearer. Because of reading the first 4 last year and then rereading the first 4 to go into the 5th one, I definitely had that experience of deepening my understanding of the world before diving into book 5. But I actually want to reread it again, because definitely when it comes to book 5, I've forgotten a lot about it. I definitely know that I really enjoy the way that prophecy is handled within this one. But so we're looking at this boy called Kieran, and so when we start off the story, we are in jail. Kieran is in jail, and we are introduced to his jailer Talon, and Talon and Kieran will be alternating storytelling throughout the book. They will tell the story of how Kieran ended up in prison in the first place, but they've decided to start the story at different points in time. And so I really enjoyed this one a whole lot. It also has like all of the possible queer representation that you can imagine, and more or less most of the characters within this book end up being queer, for example, so it's not just like your token queerness. There's a whole lot of queerness involved within this one, and I just live for Terate. Terate is my favorite character within this series, and I hope more people get to love and enjoy and appreciate the series. And then we're down to the final category, which is the I abandoned the series or I treated it as a standalone. And so first up we have Desperate Measures. Desperate Measures is basically fantasy romance erotica, I would say. It's basically a Jasmine Jafar romance story, and it has like a lot of kink in it, daddy kink as well, which I did not really appreciate. So I mean, I had an okay time with this book, definitely, but yeah, anytime that I read romance, I kind of afterwards feel like I wasted my time with it, just because it doesn't really satisfy my favorite things in books, you know. It's purely there for like a quick mind-numbing experience for me, which is fine, you know, that's the type of experience that sometimes I'm craving, but in the whole it does not really have an impact on my reading life, or at the end of the year I will never really think about this book, but so that's why I'm putting it in here, because most likely I will never read anything else within the series, maybe one day, but at this point in time I don't really consider it as like a series that I need to complete, you know. Secondly, we have the Mirror Visitor series. I've forgotten the name of the author, so that will be on the screen. This is YA fantasy translated from French. I really wanted to love this one. I read this in French as well, and it was difficult in the beginning to get into, also because of the French, of course, but also because of the pacing. It's so slow paced at the beginning. I did not like the characters. Like, our main character is like super bland, which sometimes can work in my favor, because then I like that sort of bland protagonist. I like seeing those types of protagonists as well from time to time. However, the romance was a romance I couldn't really root for, because it's an arranged marriage type of romance, plus the guy puts in like zero effort to try and bond with his wife, and yeah, there was nothing to latch on to. But at the point in which I was finally getting somewhat invested in this story, and I thought like, okay, I've like hit my stride with this one, I can continue on and it will be a great read from now on. The story kind of resets, not fully resets of course, but we kind of have a new beginning, so to speak. Circumstances change and our character is thrown into another new environment where she has to kind of find her place within this new environment, and kind of the relationships that she had established kind of reset, and she meets new people that she has to start a relationship with, that she has to build some sort of a relationship with from scratch. And so I was just like, ugh. I got through a few chapters within that second part, but then I was just like, no, I'm not doing this again. I'm not starting from zero again in order to get invested. And so, yeah, this one I am not continuing with. So the Mirror Visitor series is a series in which we are looking at this young girl who has been married off to somebody from a different realm, or a different sphere, I think they're called. I'm not entirely sure anymore. Basically, in this world, the earth kind of shattered into different spheres, and so there are all of these cities that are these spheres of in and of themselves, but there's not a lot of travel between the different spheres, and each sphere basically has this sort of like own personality, or this own sort of like matriarch sort of deal. And so marrying to a different sphere is basically like abandoning your family or leaving your entire family situation behind. And so our protagonist is married off to somebody from a different sphere, and she kind of has to live her life there in hiding, because nobody there is supposed to know yet about this marriage and about its potential political advantages. And so she's kind of kept in hiding, kept away from the world. Her husband doesn't really have an interest in her, but she has an interesting magical power, and that is to know the history of objects when she touches them, and to travel through mirrors. Yeah, I didn't like it. Next up we have the Strange the Dreamer duology by Laini Taylor. I only read the first one, and I don't think I'll continue to the second one. I initially enjoyed my time with Strange the Dreamer. In this world there's this city called Weep, and at a certain point in history, all memory, all knowledge of the city of Weep kind of disappeared. And so our protagonist Laszlo Strange still remembers the moment in which he lost this memory. And as a result, he's always been fascinated with retrieving knowledge about this city. And so he's currently working at a library at a sort of like prestigious academy, where he basically just hands scholars the books that they requested. But in his spare time, he is researching the city of Weep. Now, I really enjoyed the beginning. I liked the introduction to the story. I liked the writing style at first, and I had sort of like a vision of where the story was going to go, and then the story went in a very different direction. And it was a direction that ended up not really suiting me, not really pleasing me. I was not very happy with especially the second half of the book, because in the second half of the book there's just a whole lot of dream sequences, and especially in the dream sequences the writing style just really didn't work for me. It just was that same sort of like purple, overly flowery, overly elaborated writing style that I understand works for a dream sequence, but it just didn't work for me personally. And so also there was too much sort of like a romance story involved within that second half to suit my needs. And so at the end of book one I was like, okay, it was okay. I didn't like this, I didn't hate it or anything like that, but I also didn't really love it. It was very much a meh sort of story for me, so I don't need to continue. Then the one that I abandoned pretty early on, also for the writing style, is Tale of Shikanoko by Leon Hearn. So this is a Japanese fantasy trilogy, and I don't really remember much about the story to begin with. I think there were these sort of like I think our protagonist Shikanoko was abandoned to die by his uncle, or he was kind of set up by his uncle and then abandoned to die. However, he is found in the woods by this mysterious woman who heals him, I believe, and then kind of says that he is fated to be the legendary Shikanoko or something like that. My main problem with this series was the writing style, because it's very much told as if it's in the way of legends. When we are retelling legends or myths or something like that, that sort of writing style was a writing style of this book. A very detached, distant sort of writing style that just does not work for me. It meant that I had zero emotional involvement, and so I decided not to give it my attention, not to continue on. And then we're gonna end this video with one that I abandoned the series, but I absolutely loved the book that I did read. So this is kind of not necessarily fully fitting into this video, but that would be The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. So in principle, The Goblin Emperor is a standalone. However, there's a spin-off series of 2 books that together form one series to some extent, and so I'm gonna count it in here. But so The Goblin Emperor, we are following our protagonist called Maya, who is a, like, I don't know, 4th son or so of the king of this empire. However, he has been banished from the empire because of his goblin roots. So he's basically been sent off to the middle of nowhere with a disgraced political figure in order for him to be kept out of the royal attention. However, what nobody expected was for both the king and his 3 elder sons to die at the same time, leaving Maya the next emperor. Maya has had no political training for this role. He has not been in a court situation in a very long time, so he's also not aware, so he's also not been acclimatized to this environment, and so this book will be about him taking on this new mantle and learning to deal with these responsibilities, learning to deal with court intrigue. This is quite often described as a cozy fantasy, which I don't fully agree with. It isn't a fully cozy fantasy, but the cozy aspect to it is the wholesomeness of our protagonist Maya and some of the people that surround him. It is definitely not a court intrigue in the way that you might imagine. There's not backstabbing left and right. It is very much more about him indeed learning to find his new place in society, learning to deal with the trauma from having been banished from his family life at an early age onwards and from having been treated as lesser his entire life. So in that sense it's definitely much more cozy indeed, because it focuses on the wholesome aspects. I love the character of Maya and I got really obsessed with him as we got further and further into this book. I will say that the ending didn't fully satisfy me neither. There's a sort of subplot that was established that I had hoped would be more epic in its conclusion, and that I had kind of made some expectations in my mind about how the political intrigue would come to play with that subplot, and things went down very differently. And I would say when it comes to the court intrigue, I felt like a lot of times when there were these sort of plots being established, we are unaware of them and until they really all of a sudden explode, and so it does not have this sort of satisfying build to it. But yeah, I love the protagonist and I loved reading this story. However, the spin-off of this series is following a character that, while he interested me, he is very much taking on a detective role, and as I said, I don't like detective plot lines, and so I'm expecting the spin-off series for the Goblin Emperor to be very much focused on murder, mystery, detective plot lines, and so I'm not expecting to like it, and I would definitely miss Maya, and so I'm deciding not to continue. But so yeah, those were all the series that I made progress in 2022. I did not make a tally at the moment in which August ended, which I will definitely try to remember to do next year, but I'm pretty sure that the tally would be negative. I started a whole ton of series in especially 2022, and I did not really complete a whole lot of things, so I think 2023 will need to be the year in which I kind of fix that issue and kind of focus on finishing some series, or at least catching up to as many as possible. But so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Definitely let me know what's like some of the priority series for you would be, or which one of these series you're like, ooh, but you need to absolutely make work of finishing that one because it has an amazing conclusion or something like that. So yeah, with that I'm gonna end this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it and see you guys for the next one. Bye!